But nature, at times, has its own guardians. A distant roar, almost a lament, echoed. Suddenly, with a force that defied logic, the steel door was ripped open, its bolts twisted like paper. Through the gaping crack, no human rescue came, but a mystical vision. An albino lion, its white fur almost invisible in the icy mist emanating from the frozen meat. It was not a monster, but a primal force, its eyes fixed on the elderly woman's fragility. The dog, so confident before, hesitated, sensing the imposing presence. Before it could even think of attacking the woman, the albino lion, with a swift and silent movement, surprised the dog, immobilizing it with instinctive precision, pulling it away from the victim without a single scratch on the elderly woman. The rich man's terror transformed into an icy silence as the white beast stood like a living statue, an unexpected guardian against human cruelty. The silence that followed was not a relief, but a suspension of time, more oppressive than any noise. The roar that had torn open the steel door, the shock of the intervention, all gave way to a chilling quiet, punctuated only by the distant hum of the cold room's compressors and the dog's suppressed whimper. The albino lion, a vision of primal power, held the fierce dog immobilized. Its claws, once ready to attack, were now trapped beneath the massive paw of the white beast. There was no unnecessary violence, just absolute, almost disinterested control. The dog, a predator trained for cruelty, was now a frightened pup, its body trembling uncontrollably, a low, contained lament escaping its throat. Outside, behind the armored glass, Elias was paralyzed. His eyes, once filled with sadistic satisfaction, now reflected an icy terror that surpassed the cold of the chamber. This was not possible. Lions did not break down steel doors. Lions did not appear out of nowhere in cold rooms, defying logic and physics. His rational mind, accustomed to controlling every aspect of his existence, failed miserably to process that image. The lion, white as snow, seemed to stare at him through the mist, a silent, powerful accusation that pierced the glass and the distance. The air around Elias seemed thin. The temperature of the control room, once pleasant, now felt as cold as the hell he had created for his mother. Inside the chamber, Donna Clara watched. The initial shock gave way to a stunning confusion, then to an almost mystical acceptance. Her eyes, blurred by age and cold, could barely believe what they saw. A lion, a white angel. She felt the icy air burn her lungs, but a strange current of warmth, not physical, but of hope and reverence, began to spread through her chest. The lion, with a slow and deliberate movement, released the dog. The animal, free, did not try to escape or attack again. Instead, it retreated, cowering against the piles of frozen meat, its eyes fixed on the white beast, a mixture of fear and strangely submission. The lion then turned completely to Donna Clara. There was no aggression in its golden eyes, only an intensity that seemed to penetrate her soul, assessing, perhaps, her essence. It approached, each step silent and majestic, the mist dancing around its paws, as if the icy air itself revered it. Elias, from outside, saw the lion approach his mother. A scream caught in his throat. Would this be the end? The savage justice he so despised, manifesting in such an inexplicable way. He expected an attack, a bloody outcome, but the lion merely positioned itself beside Donna Clara, its enormous head, covered by a dense white mane, lowered gently, and it brushed its muzzle against the elderly woman's shoulder. It was not a gesture of domestic affection, but a touch of primordial protection, a recognition of fragility and innocence. Donna Clara, in turn, extended a trembling hand, almost instinctively, and touched the lion's cold, soft fur. An inexplicable connection formed, a bond between life on the verge of death and the indomitable force of nature. Elias watched the scene with a mixture of horror and sick fascination. What would he do now? Call security. What security could handle an albino lion that broke down steel doors? The police. He would be ridiculed, perhaps arrested for negligence or worse. His reputation, his fortune, everything he had built with such cruelty and calculation seemed to crumble before that mystical creature. He clenched his fists, feeling cold sweat run down his forehead. Control, his most potent drug, had been ripped from him. He was powerless. And that powerlessness was more terrifying than any roar. The cold room, once a monument to his cruelty, was now a stage for the impossible. The metallic smell of frozen blood and raw meat mingled with the lion's icy breath, creating a dense, almost palpable atmosphere. The mist, once merely an effect of the extreme cold, now seemed like a mystical veil, enveloping the lion and the elderly woman in an ethereal aura. The lion did not seem to feel the cold. Its golden eyes, which had previously fixed on the dog, now swept the environment, pausing briefly at the armored glass, as if it knew exactly who was on the other side, watching. It was a look of warning, of defiance. Elias felt the impact of that gaze. This was not an irrational animal trapped in a strange environment. It was an entity with purpose. The lion was not there by chance. It was there for her, for Donna Clara, and it was there against him. The message was clear, though silent. Nature had its limits, and Elias had crossed them. The beast's power was not just physical, but moral. It was the force of justice manifesting unexpectedly, breaking the rules of the human world to restore a lost balance. The lion, still beside Donna Clara, let out a low sound, a deep purr that vibrated through the icy air. It was not a roar of threat, but a sound of comfort, of presence. The elderly woman, with tear-filled eyes but now with a new strength, looked at the lion, then at the glass, where her son's figure was frozen in despair. A faint, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her cracked lips. It was not a smile of victory, but of resignation, of acceptance that her destiny was now in the paws of a creature that defied all logic. The game had changed. And Elias, the rich man who thought he had everything under control, had just discovered that there were forces far beyond his money and influence. The meat locker, his instrument of torture, had become the sanctuary of an improbable guardian, and the stage for a confrontation he could never have predicted. What would the lion do next, and how would Elias react to this divine and wild intervention? The answer hung in the icy air, as dense as the mist that enveloped the scene. The air in Elias's control room seemed to solidify, heavy with the smell of his own cold sweat and the mute echo of his powerlessness. The lion, white as death itself, yet emanating a primal life, had brushed its muzzle against his mother, a gesture of savage tenderness that tore at Elias's logic and sanity. He clenched his fists until his nails dug into his flesh, the physical pain a fragile anchor amidst the turmoil of his mind. This could not be happening. Lions did not exist there. Lions did not break down reinforced steel doors. His frantic gaze swept over the control panel, searching for a solution, a magic button that could reverse the impossible. His fingers, once so firm in manipulating his mother's fate, now trembled uncontrollably. He tried the intercom. "Security! Security! There's an intrusion in the main cold room, a wild animal!" His voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper, and he had to repeat, louder, but with a desperation he couldn't hide. On the other side, only static silence, or perhaps the disbelief of the few employees still on duty at that late hour. Who would believe in an albino lion in a meat locker? He would be branded a lunatic. Inside the chamber, the lion gently moved away from Donna Clara, but did not abandon her. Its golden eyes, which seemed to carry the wisdom of ages, fixed again on the armored glass, directly on Elias. It was not a look of anger, but of cold, relentless understanding, as if the beast could see through the man's soul, judging him in silence. Elias felt a chill that did not come from the cold of the chamber, but from that gaze. It was accusation personified, wild nature confronting his calculating cruelty. The lion, with a deliberate slowness that heightened the tension, began to move, not towards the broken door, nor to the cowering dog. Instead, it headed to one of the internal panels of the chamber, those that controlled the temperature and ventilation. Elias, from outside, watched with growing horror. What would the creature do? Would it be able to manipulate human technology? The idea was absurd, but everything that had happened until then defied reason. With a precise and surprisingly delicate movement for an animal of its size, the lion brushed its massive paw against the panel. There was no brute force, but a subtle touch, almost a caress. And then a hissing sound filled the chamber. The hum of the compressors, once a distant lament, began to diminish. The mist, which had been dense and oppressive, began to slowly dissipate. The temperature, imperceptibly at first, began to rise. Donna Clara felt it. The icy air that had previously burned her lungs now seemed less biting. A gust of milder, almost warm air began to circulate. She looked at the lion, then at the panel, a spark of understanding and awe in her eyes. The lion was not just protecting her. It was actively trying to alleviate her suffering, defying Elias's very mechanism of torture. Elias, from outside, saw the temperature indicators on his panel. They were rising, slowly, but rising. No, impossible! He pounded on the glass, then on the controls. He tried to reverse the action, but the chamber panel somehow did not respond to his external commands. It was as if the machine itself had been subjugated by the beast's will. He was losing control of his own prison. The lion, as if it had completed its immediate task, turned again to Donna Clara. It lay down on the icy floor, its white mane spreading like a halo around its head. It was not an invitation for her to approach, but a comforting presence, a visual warmth amidst the cold. The fierce dog, which had been observing everything from its corner, seemed to have lost all its ferocity. It was cowering, eyes wide, no longer threatening, but a mere terrified spectator of that wild miracle. Elias, in his desperation, picked up the emergency phone. "I need an animal containment team, now, on my property. A large wild animal is in the cold room," he shouted, his voice choked with panic. "It's a lion, an albino lion. Yes, I know how it sounds, but it's the truth. It broke down the door. It's with my mother." The voice on the other end, probably a night emergency operator, sounded skeptical, but the urgency in Elias's tone was undeniable. He hung up the phone, sweat running down his forehead, an icy dread clutching his chest. The containment team would take time, a lot of time. And what would they do against a creature that defied physics and logic? He looked again at the chamber. The mist was almost completely dissipated. Donna Clara, though still weak, seemed to breathe more easily, a slight flush returning to her cheeks. The lion, majestic and serene, was her guardian. The lion's gaze met his once more. This time there was something more, a challenge. A silent promise that Elias's cruelty would not go unpunished. The game was no longer about Donna Clara's life, but about Elias's soul, and perhaps about the very order of the world he believed he controlled. What would happen when the containment team arrived, and what would the lion do until then? The meat locker, now less cold, was a stage for a confrontation that transcended human understanding, a clash between the darkness of a man's soul and the primordial light of a mystical beast. Cold sweat ran down Elias's face, mixing with the metallic smell of dread. The phone, now inert in his hand, felt like a heavy, useless object. He had called for help, but the voice on the other end, laden with skepticism, only reinforced the unreality of the situation. An albino lion in his meat locker with his mother. The phrase sounded like a delusion, a cruel joke from the universe. But it was real, and the lion inside was not just real, but a force that defied everything Elias knew. His bloodshot eyes fixed on the control panel, the temperature indicators continued to rise, slowly, inexorably. The lion had deactivated his torture mechanism. The humiliation was deep, cutting. He was the master of that domain, the architect of that suffering, and now a wild beast had dismantled his power with a simple paw touch. Rage bubbled up, hot and corrosive, momentarily overcoming the fear. He could not allow this. He could not lose. With a hoarse roar of frustration, Elias punched the panel again, then tried every button, every lever, as if brute force could reverse the inexplicable. He tried to turn on the cold air fans to maximum, but nothing. The system was dead to his external commands, as if a superior intelligence had blocked it. The chamber, once his fortress, was now a sanctuary for his victim and her guardian. Inside the chamber, the mist had almost completely dissipated, revealing the vastness of the space and the hanging carcasses, now less threatening under the rising temperature. Donna Clara, still sitting on the floor, felt the gentle warmth envelop her body. Her cracked lips, once blue, began to regain a pale color. The air, once biting, now entered her lungs with less pain. She coughed weakly, but it was a cough of relief, not agony. The lion, lying a few feet from her, watched her with majestic serenity. Its golden eyes, once fixed on Elias, now conveyed a deep, almost protective calm. It was as if the beast knew exactly what it was doing and what needed to be done. It was not just an animal. It was a specter of justice, a herald of a lost balance. Donna Clara extended her hand again, this time more firmly, and touched the lion's fur. There was no fear, only silent gratitude. The lion responded with a low purr, a sound that vibrated in its chest and resonated through the concrete floor. It was the melody of life, of protection, in stark contrast to the deadly silence Elias had imposed. The fierce dog, which had once been the personification of threat, was now a pathetic figure cowering in a corner, trembling. Its eyes, once full of malice, were fixed on the lion, filled with a primordial terror. It was no longer the executioner, but a victim of a greater hierarchy, a force it could neither understand nor fight. The lion had broken its will, not with violence, but with its mere presence. Elias, from outside, watched the scene with a mixture of hatred and despair. His mother caressing the lion. The dog, his instrument of terror, reduced to a frightened heap of fur. It was a waking nightmare. He needed to do something. He needed to regain control. His eyes swept the control room, searching for any other tool. There was an emergency intercom system, an alarm siren, and a button to release paralyzing gas, used to immobilize large animals in case of an escape from a nearby zoo, with whom he had a secret agreement for disposal of unwanted specimens. It was an extreme measure, but Elias was beyond reason. "Mother!" he shouted into the microphone, his voice distorted by the system. "Get away from that monster! It will kill you! I will activate the gas!" Donna Clara raised her head, her eyes meeting Elias's through the glass. The faint smile on her lips deepened. It was not scorn, but a deep sadness, a resignation Elias could not understand. She knew he was capable of anything, but now she was not alone. The lion, hearing Elias's voice, raised its head, its golden eyes fixed on the glass again, and this time there was a cold intensity, a silent threat that made Elias's blood run cold. The lion seemed to understand every word, every intention. Elias hesitated. The paralyzing gas was potent. It could kill his mother, even if the intention was only to immobilize the lion. But the lion was the immediate threat to his authority, to his sanity. He could not back down. With a cry of fury, he reached for the red button, labeled "Paralyzing Gas, Extreme Use." His fingers trembled, but his determination was ironclad. He preferred to destroy everything rather than lose control. But before his fingers touched the button, a distant sound began to be heard. A low hum, which quickly turned into a growing roar. It was not the roar of an animal, but the unmistakable sound of sirens. Multiple sirens. The animal containment team was arriving. And it didn't seem to be just one vehicle. Elias froze, his hand hovering over the button. He had called for help, but he didn't expect such an immediate nor such an ostentatious response. What would they say? How would he explain an albino lion inside his meat locker? His reputation, his image as an impeccable businessman, was about to be shattered. The lion, inside the chamber, also seemed to hear. Its ears twitched, picking up the approaching sounds. It stood up, majestic and imposing, and positioned itself between Donna Clara and the broken door, like a living wall of white fur. Its golden eyes, once serene, now gleamed with fierce determination, ready for whatever came. Donna Clara looked at the lion, then at the glass. Elias's expression was a mask of panic and despair. The game, which he thought he controlled, had completely slipped from his hands. The arrival of the containment team was not a salvation for him, but the beginning of his ruin. The blue and red lights of the vehicles began to flash through the control room windows, illuminating Elias's pale face with intermittent flashes. The sound of the sirens was deafening now, accompanied by the screech of tires and the noise of authoritative voices. The property, once a refuge for his cruelty, was being invaded. The lion let out a low growl, a guttural sound that was not of fear, but of warning. It was a challenge. Nature, in its purest and most indomitable form, was ready to face the world of men and their broken rules. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Elias, the man who considered himself a god, was merely a helpless spectator in his own private hell. The main gate of the property downstairs creaked under the impact of something heavy. They were inside. The roar of sirens ripped through the night, a strident chorus that announced not salvation, but the inevitable exposure of an empire built on cruelty. Elias, paralyzed, watched the blue and red lights dance across the control room walls, transforming his sanctuary of torment into a stage for his own ruin. The sound of heavy boots and authoritative voices echoed down the corridor, each step a hammer blow to the facade of his respectability. He had called for help, but what arrived was not a rescue, but a judgment. The control room door burst open, revealing a squad of men and women in animal containment uniforms, their faces serious and armed with long-range tranquilizers, nets, and electric prods. At their head, a burly man with a protective vest and a hardened demeanor, the team leader. His eyes swept the room, fixing on Elias, then on the damaged control panel, and finally on the cold room, where the steel door, now a twisted heap of metal, told an impossible story. "Mr. Elias Vancini?" The leader's voice was grave, charged with an authority Elias rarely heard directed at him. "We received an emergency call about a wild animal on your property. What is going on here?" Elias tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Cold sweat ran down his back, and the metallic smell of dread was almost palpable. It's a lion, an albino lion. It broke down the door. My mother, she's in there." The leader's eyes narrowed in disbelief, but the scene before him, the destroyed door, the icy vapor still emanating from the chamber, was undeniable. "An albino lion? Sir? That is highly improbable. Where would it be?" Before he could finish, one of the agents, younger and wide-eyed, pointed to the inside of the chamber. The mist, though thinner, still lingered, but the imposing silhouette of the albino lion was now unmistakable. It stood majestic, a white spectre amidst the gloom and hanging carcasses. Its golden eyes, fixed on the newcomers, gleamed with an intensity that transcended mere ferocity. It was an ancestral intelligence, a wild wisdom that defied reason. A murmur of astonishment ran through the team. Some recoiled, others raised their tranquilizer guns, ready for the unthinkable. The leader, though visibly shocked, maintained his composure. "My God, it's real. Prepare the high-potency darts. Do not fire unless absolutely necessary. Priority, the hostage. Where is the lady?" Donna Clara, who until then had been sitting leaning against the wall, slowly rose, with the help of the lion, which moved gently, so she could lean on its paw. She was weak, but her eyes met those of the team with surprising clarity. She did not look like a terrified victim, but a queen protected by her guardian. "I'm here." Her voice was a hoarse whisper, but audible in the tense silence that had fallen. "He won't hurt me. He saved me." Donna Clara's declaration added a layer of surrealism to the scene. The lion, as if understanding, let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated in the air, not of aggression, but of warning. It was a reminder of its presence, its strength, and the invisible line that no man should cross. Elias, watching the events unfold, felt a knot of terror tighten in his stomach. His mother was testifying against him, and the lion, her protector, was living proof of his cruelty. The containment team, now divided between shock and the need to act, seemed hesitant. They were trained to deal with wild animals, but not with miracles. The fierce dog, which had been the terror of the chamber, was now cowering under a pile of carcasses, trembling uncontrollably. Its eyes, once full of malice, reflected the same dread Elias felt, but with even greater powerlessness. It was a mere spectator, a ghost of what it had been, eclipsed by the lion's majesty. The team leader, with a radio in hand, began to give orders in a low voice. "We need reinforcements. Field veterinarian unit urgently. We have an albino lion," yes, I said albino lion, "and an elderly lady who appears to be, well, protected by it. And Mr. Vancini, he seems to be in shock." Elias was not in shock. He was in panic. His life, his reputation, everything he had built was crumbling before his eyes. He tried to approach the glass, gesticulating frantically to his mother. "Mother, don't say those things. They'll think you're delirious. The lion is dangerous." Donna Clara merely looked at him, the sadness in her eyes deeper than any accusation. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was there, visible to all, in the broken door, in the cold of the chamber, and in the lion's protective presence. One of the agents, a man with a keener eye, noticed the temperature indicators on Elias's control panel. "Mr. Vancini, the temperature of this chamber, it's rising. And the door, it seems to have been forced from the inside out. What exactly was happening here?" The question hung in the air, laden with innuendo. The team leader, hearing the observation, turned to Elias, his eyes now not just skeptical, but accusing. Elias's mask was falling, and the truth, cold and cruel as the chamber's ice, was about to be revealed. The lion, inside the chamber, let out a stronger roar, a sound that seemed to echo nature's own indignation. It knew, it always knew, and now the world would know too. The air in the control room grew thick, heavy with the unspoken question, yet clearly implied. What had Elias Vancini done? The observation about the door being forced from the inside out and the chamber's temperature rising were not mere technical details. They were the first cracks in the carefully constructed facade of a man who saw himself above laws and morality. Elias felt the ground beneath his feet crumble. His eyes, once filled with fury and control, now darted between the perceptive agent and the team leader, who stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and growing suspicion. No, "It's not what it looks like," Elias stammered, his voice a thin thread of desperation. "The lion. It must have gotten in somehow and then, in a panic, tried to get out. The temperature, I was testing the refrigeration system. A malfunction, perhaps." But his words were hollow, devoid of the conviction that once defined him. The team leader, a man with years of experience in unraveling the most bizarre animal situations, was not fooled. He approached the control panel, his trained eyes scanning the indicators, the buttons, the fingerprints. Elias's hand still trembled over the paralyzing gas button, a detail that did not go unnoticed. "Mr. Vancini, this is a high-tech security system. Malfunctions like this don't happen without a cause or an intervention," the leader mused, his voice low but charged with unshakable authority. "And your mother, she said the lion saved her. From what exactly? And why was she locked in a cold room with a wild animal if it wasn't meant to be a guard dog?" The accusation, though indirect, hit Elias like a physical blow. He recoiled a step, his mind racing for a new lie, a new escape route, but there was nowhere to run. The truth, like the albino lion, had broken down the door and refused to be contained. Inside the chamber, Donna Clara watched her son. The sadness in her eyes was an ocean of pain, but also of a strange peace. She had endured years of silent cruelty, of manipulation and control. Now, Elias's mask had fallen, not by his own will, but by the intervention of a force he could never have predicted or dominated. The lion, sensing the rising tension, let out a deeper growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the steel walls of the chamber, an echo of the truth that was about to be unearthed. It was a growl of protection, of warning, and of primordial justice. The fierce dog, once Elias's instrument of terror, was now a trembling mass of fur and fear, cowering beneath the carcasses. It dared not even lift its head, its former ferocity completely annihilated by the lion's majestic presence. It was the perfect image of corrupted power, now subjugated by wild purity. The team leader, after a brief radio communication, turned to Elias, his eyes cold and determined. "Mr. Vancini, I will need you to step away from the control panel, and do not touch anything else. I have just requested the presence of the police and a forensic investigation team. The situation here is much more complex than a simple animal rescue." The mention of the police and forensic investigation was the final blow. Elias felt his blood run cold. It was not just his reputation at stake now, but his freedom, his life. The empire he had built with such cynicism and cruelty was crumbling, brick by brick, under the relentless gaze of the law and nature. "No! You can't do this!" Elias screamed, his voice shrill and uncontrolled. "I am Elias Vancini. I have lawyers. I have influence. You don't know who you're dealing with." But his threats were empty, echoing in a room that no longer respected him. The agents, once cautious, now moved with renewed determination, forming a semicircle around him. One of them, with a firm gaze, pointed to the chamber glass. "Mr. Vancini, your mother is in there, and whatever happened, she doesn't seem to be afraid of the monster." Oh, quite the opposite. Donna Clara, hearing the commotion, took a step forward, leaning gently against the lion's flank. Her eyes met those of the team leader, and in her expression there was an unshakable clarity. "He saved me," she repeated, her voice hoarse but firm. "My son, he locked me in here with the dog to punish me." Donna Clara's confession reverberated through the room, silencing Elias and shocking the team. The truth, raw and stark, was more terrible than any scenario they could have imagined. The lion, as if understanding the gravity of the words, let out a low growl, almost a lament that seemed to seal Elias's fate. The team leader, with a nod to his men, gave the order. "Mr. Vancini, you are under arrest. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Elias, pale and defeated, watched as two agents approached to handcuff him. His resistance had vanished, replaced by an icy terror. He looked at his mother, at the albino lion protecting her, and at the cowering dog. The image was a mirror of his own distorted soul. The cold chamber, which he had transformed into a prison and instrument of torture, was now the stage of his own downfall. The ice that once froze meat now froze his destiny, and the lion, the unexpected guardian, was the herald of a wild and relentless justice. The final confrontation was no longer about a wild animal, but about the soul of a man and the consequences of his cruelty. The metallic sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the control room, a requiem for Elias Vancini's empire. It was not a loud sound, but it carried the weight of a sentence, of a sealed fate. Elias felt the cold metal on his wrists, a chill different from the chamber's ice, but equally paralyzing. His mind, once a labyrinth of strategies and manipulations, was now a chaos of denial and terror. He tried to pull his hands away, a useless reflex, but the agents held him firmly. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now reflected an icy dread, darting between the impassive faces of the agents and the glass that separated him from his mother. Inside, Donna Clara watched. The pain in her eyes was deep, but the anger had been replaced by a serene quietness. She felt no triumph, only a monumental exhaustion, the end of a silent war fought for years. The albino lion, her unexpected guardian, nudged its head against her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and presence. Its white fur, once a disguise in the mist, now gleamed under the chamber lights, a beacon of purity amidst the darkness of human cruelty. That animal, a predator of nature, had become the most improbable of guardian angels. The team leader, with Elias in custody, turned his attention to the chamber. The situation was unprecedented. An elderly woman, visibly weak but lucid, protected by an albino lion that seemed to have an almost human understanding of events. And the fierce dog, once the terror of the chamber, now a heap of fear and powerlessness, was a silent witness to the brutal hierarchy that had been subverted. "We need a stretcher and paramedics for the lady," the leader instructed, his voice calm but firm, "and a specialized containment team for the lion, but no sedatives for now. The lady seems to have a connection with it." The mention of sedatives made Donna Clara flinch slightly. The lion, sensing the change in its protected one, let out a low growl, a subtle warning that made the agents hesitate. They were trained to deal with beasts, but not with the complexity of such a bizarre and profound relationship. The line between wild animal and loyal protector was thin, almost invisible. Elias, now handcuffed and being escorted out of the room, cast one last look at his mother. "Mother, please. They'll take you away. They'll take the lion. You're sick, delirious." His voice was a desperate lament, the last attempt at control, at manipulation. But Donna Clara merely shook her head, the sadness in her eyes answering all his lies. She was not delirious. She was finally free. The control room door opened, and a flood of new faces invaded the environment. Uniformed police officers, with their bulletproof vests and serious gazes, entered first, followed by forensic technicians with their briefcases and equipment. The air grew even denser, charged with the gravity of the law. One of the police officers, a detective with a tired but perceptive gaze, stopped Elias. "Mr. Vancini, I am Detective Almeida. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." The words were a final blow, the formalization of his downfall. Elias, who had always seen himself above the law, was now entangled in its tightest meshes. His influence, his money, none of it seemed to matter at that moment. He was just a man, handcuffed, confronted with the truth of his actions. Inside the chamber, the temperature continued to rise slowly, revealing more details of the scene. The meat carcasses, once enveloped in an icy mist, now seemed more defined, more grotesque. The fierce dog, still cowering, trembled so much it seemed about to faint. Its ferocity had been completely crushed, replaced by a primal fear that prevented it from even looking at the lion. The containment team leader, after a brief conversation with the detective, approached the chamber glass. "Donna Clara, we are here to help you. We can open the door now, but we need the lion to move away a little for your safety and for the safety of the team." Donna Clara looked at the lion, then at the men outside. The hesitation was palpable. She trusted the lion more than any human at that moment. The lion, as if understanding the situation, let out a low growl, almost a murmur, and stepped back, but stayed close enough to intervene if necessary. It was an act of trust, a silent permission. The forensic technicians began to document the scene, taking photos of the control panel, the broken door, the claw marks on the steel. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle, building the narrative of Elias's cruelty and the lion's miraculous intervention. The cold chamber, once an instrument of torture and punishment, was now a crime scene, a stage where the truth had been brutally revealed. Donna Clara, with the help of the lion, which gently nudged her with its head, began to move towards the door. Every step was a victory, an act of liberation. The lion followed her closely, its golden eyes fixed on her, its presence a promise of unwavering protection. Elias Vancini's world had collapsed, not because of a financial miscalculation or a corporate betrayal, but by the indomitable force of nature and the silent courage of a mother. Justice, wild and relentless, had found its way, not through courts or lawyers, but through the roar of an albino lion and the confession of a woman who finally found her voice. The cold of the chamber, which should have been her tomb, had become the catalyst for her resurrection. The cold of the chamber, which should have been her tomb, had become the catalyst for her resurrection. But for Elias Vancini, the cold that now enveloped him was that of defeat, of isolation, of relentless law. As he was dragged out of the control room, his eyes fixed one last time on his mother. The image of her, fragile but upright, her hand gently resting on the flank of the albino lion, was a blow more painful than any handcuff. It was the personification of his failure, of his exposed cruelty. He tried to scream again, but his throat was dry, his voice a mere hoarse whisper that was lost in the growing hum of the rescue team and the police. Detective Almeida, with a firm gesture, gently pushed him towards the door, sealing his fate beyond that environment. Inside, the tension was palpable. Donna Clara was now a few steps from the chamber door, the albino lion right behind her, its golden eyes scanning the external environment with an almost human vigilance. The containment team leader, realizing the delicacy of the situation, raised his hands in a gesture of appeasement. "Donna Clara, we are opening the door now. Please come slowly, and the lion, it can stay a little behind you, but we need it not to approach the team immediately." Donna Clara nodded, her weak breath forming small clouds in the still cold air. She looked at the lion, and the animal, as if understanding the urgency, let out a low growl, almost a purr, and positioned itself slightly behind her. A white wall of muscle and protective instinct. The gesture was a testament to the extraordinary connection they had forged. With a radio command, the technicians activated the mechanism. A soft hiss of air escaped, followed by a mechanical click. The steel door, which had seemed impassable, began to open slowly, revealing the interior of the cold chamber to the outside world. A gust of icy air and the metallic smell of meat invaded the control room. The paramedics, already positioned, advanced cautiously. Donna Clara took the first step out, swaying slightly. Her muscles, atrophied by the cold and inactivity, barely supported her, but the determination in her eyes was unshakable. The albino lion, with surprising grace for its size, followed her, stopping at the threshold of the door, its eyes fixed on the paramedics. It was a living barrier, a silent warning. "Slowly, ma'am. We are here to help you," said a paramedic with a soft voice, extending her hand. Donna Clara, still distrustful of any human touch other than the lion's, hesitated. The lion, sensing her reluctance, brushed its muzzle against her hand, a silent encouragement. It was the signal she needed. She accepted the paramedic's support and was gently led to a waiting stretcher. As she was wrapped in thermal blankets, her lips trembled, not just from cold, but from an emotion suppressed for years. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. He saved me." Her eyes turned to the lion, which remained at the chamber entrance. An imposing and majestic figure, the fierce dog, still cowering under the carcasses, was a stain of fear and shame. No one seemed to care about it at that moment. Its ferocity had been crushed, and now it was just a terrified animal, the personification of the cruelty Elias had tried to impose. One of the containment team agents, with an extended catch-pole, cautiously approached the chamber entrance, but the lion let out a low growl, a clear warning that its vigilance had not diminished. "No, wait," said the containment team leader, raising his hand. "The lady has a connection with him. We cannot simply sedate him. We need a more careful approach, and the dog, it's no longer a threat. We'll leave it there for now. The focus is Donna Clara." The forensic technicians, meanwhile, worked tirelessly. Every claw mark on the steel door, every drop of melted ice, every detail of the hanging meat was photographed and documented. The cold chamber, once a dark secret, was now an open book of evidence, telling the story of unimaginable cruelty and miraculous intervention. Outside Elias Vancini's property, chaos began to set in. Police cars, ambulances and press vans formed a cordon. Reporters, alerted by the unusual activity, were already on the phone, transmitting the first fragmented news of a scandal that would shake the city's elite. The story of the rich man who locked his elderly mother with a fierce dog, and the appearance of an albino lion as her savior, was a feast for the media. Elias, already inside a police car, watched the circus unfold. His face, once arrogant, was now distorted by a mixture of dread and disbelief. The empire he had built with such care was crumbling before his eyes, not because of a financial error, but because of an act of cruelty that nature, in its wildest and purest form, had refused to tolerate. The cold he imposed on his mother was now the cold of the cell that awaited him. A much deeper and inescapable cold. Justice, with sharp claws and a deafening roar, had finally come for Elias Vancini. The stretcher, covered by thermal blankets, seemed like a refuge, but Donna Clara's body trembled uncontrollably. It wasn't just the cold that made her tremble. It was the liberation, the adrenaline, the shock of an ordeal that defied sanity itself. The paramedics worked with silent efficiency, checking her vital signs, administering IV fluids, but her eyes never left the lion. It was still there, at the chamber's threshold, a living statue of protection, its golden eyes fixed on her, then sweeping the surroundings as if assessing every potential threat. "Donna Clara, you are safe now. We are here to take care of you," the paramedic repeated, her voice gentle but firm. She tried to divert the elderly woman's gaze to her face, to the equipment, but it was useless. The connection between the woman and the beast was an invisible bond, stronger than any lifeline medicine could offer. The containment team leader, a middle-aged man with experience etched into every wrinkle on his face, approached the stretcher. He had seen everything, but an albino lion as a savior was unprecedented. "Donna Clara, we need to talk about the lion. He is a wild animal and, well, he cannot stay here." Donna Clara, with a monumental effort, turned her head to him. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, but charged with a newfound strength. "He is not wild. He is my protector. He saved me. You cannot hurt him." The leader exchanged a look with Detective Almeida, who watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and concern. The situation was complex. Sedating the animal there, with Donna Clara so fragile and protective, could be disastrous. "No one will hurt him, ma'am," the leader assured, his voice calm. "But we need to take him to a safe place where he can be cared for. A sanctuary, perhaps. He cannot live in a mansion, no matter how much he saved you." The lion, as if understanding the conversation, let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated in the air, a clear warning. It took a step forward, and the containment team instinctively recoiled. The animal's majesty and power were undeniable, even in such an artificial environment. Meanwhile, a few meters away, the cold chamber continued to be meticulously investigated. Forensic technicians, with their gloves and cameras, documented every detail. The deep claw marks on the steel door, the hanging meat, the fierce dog cowering in a corner, still trembling, a pathetic shadow of its former ferocity. The smell of blood and ice was strong, a vivid reminder of the terror Donna Clara had endured. That place, once an instrument of torture, was now a monument to human resilience and divine, or perhaps simply natural, intervention. Outside, Elias Vancini's world crumbled in a spectacle of lights and sounds. Inside the police car, handcuffed, he watched the scene through the tinted glass. The strobe lights of the police vehicles flashed in a frantic rhythm, illuminating the faces of dozens of reporters gathered at the property entrance. Microphones were shoved against the gates, TV cameras broadcast live, and the distant hum of voices was now a deafening chorus of questions and speculations. Scandal at the Vancini mansion. Rich son traps elderly mother in cold room. Albino lion saves woman from certain death. The headlines were already being written, not in newspapers, but on cell phone screens and live broadcasts. Elias, the man who controlled financial empires with a wave of his hand, was now the protagonist of a media circus. His image of power and untouchability shattered into 1,000 pieces. The dread in his eyes was not just for what awaited him in prison, but for the public humiliation, for the loss of everything he valued, his status, his reputation, his control. He tried to look away, but it was impossible. Every flash, every shout from a reporter was a stab at his pride. The image of his mother, fragile but victorious, with the lion by her side, repeated in his mind, a vivid nightmare. He had underestimated his mother's strength, an animal's loyalty, and the relentless hand of justice. Back in the control room, Donna Clara, despite her weakness, found new determination. "I'm not going anywhere without him," she declared, her voice a little stronger, pointing to the lion. "He is my family now. He is the only one who protected me." The team leader sighed. This would not be a simple operation. The connection was undeniable, almost mystical. "Donna Clara, we will try to find a solution. But you need proper medical attention, and he is a wild animal. We cannot simply let him roam freely." The lion, perhaps sensing the tension, let out a deeper growl, a sound that made the control room windows vibrate. It was a warning, a declaration of possession. It would not move, not without her. The situation was a stalemate. The law required the animal's removal, but morality and Donna Clara's safety demanded a more delicate approach. Detective Almeida, realizing the depth of the bond, knew that any sudden move could have disastrous consequences. The story was bizarre enough. They didn't need a violent confrontation with an albino lion. As the night progressed, the Vancini mansion, once a symbol of wealth and exclusivity, became the epicenter of a drama that mixed human cruelty, animal instinct, and a justice that manifested in the most unexpected ways. Elias Vancini, the king of his own ice castle, was now frozen in his own hell, while his mother, rescued by a feline miracle, began to feel the warmth of freedom, even if still wrapped in thermal blankets and the shadow of recent trauma. The battle had been won, but the war to restore order and well-being for all was just beginning. The tension in the control room was palpable, colder than the air still emanating from the torture chamber. Donna Clara, wrapped in blankets, was a fragile figure, but her voice, though hoarse, carried the strength of a rock. "I'm not going anywhere without him," she repeated, her eyes fixed on the albino lion, which remained at the threshold, a silent and imposing guardian. The containment team leader, his face marked by exhaustion and the complexity of the situation, exchanged a desperate look with Detective Almeida. The law was clear. A wild animal of that size could not remain in a residence, much less be transported without strict protocols. But the reality before them was even clearer. Separating the lion from Donna Clara at that moment would be like tearing away her last anchor of sanity. The lion, as if understanding the gravity of the impasse, let out a low growl, a guttural sound that vibrated in everyone's chest, a reminder of its presence and its unwavering loyalty. It was not just an animal, it was the personification of the freedom and justice that Donna Clara had found. The paramedic, sensing the elderly woman's anguish, tried to intervene. "Donna Clara, we need to take you to the hospital. Your vital signs are stable, but you need complete medical care. Hypothermia, malnutrition, there's a lot to be done." Donna Clara shook her head, a stubbornness that surprised everyone. "He saved me. He is my family. If he doesn't go, I won't either." The scene was surreal. At the center of a media scandal, with the police and press in an uproar, the priority became negotiating with an elderly woman and an albino lion. Detective Almeida, his mind buzzing, knew they needed a solution that not only complied with the law, but also protected Donna Clara and avoided an even bigger circus. A confrontation with the lion would be a public relations disaster, not to mention the risk to the lives of those involved. "Donna Clara," Detective Almeida began, his voice calm and thoughtful, "we understand. He is your hero, but he is a lion. He needs a place where he can live safely, where he can be cared for by specialists. And you also need care. How about we make a deal? You allow us to take you to the hospital, and we guarantee that he will be taken to a wildlife sanctuary, a safe place, where you can visit him, where he will be treated with the respect he deserves." The lion, as if sensing the change in the tone of the conversation, tilted its head, its golden eyes fixed on Donna Clara. She hesitated, her mind divided between the need for care and the fear of losing her protector. The paramedic, sensing the opening, extended her hand again. "Think about it, Ma'am. He saved you. Now it's your turn to save yourself. And we will take care of him. We promise." Still distrustful, Donna Clara looked at the lion, seeking silent confirmation. The animal, in response, brushed its muzzle against her hand, a gesture of affection and trust. It was the signal. "A sanctuary," she whispered, her voice choked, "with visits, and he has to be well treated. No small cages. He is majestic." The containment team leader and Detective Almeida exchanged a look of relief. It was a breakthrough. "Yes, ma'am. A real sanctuary, with space, with care, and you can visit him as soon as you are recovered." The promise, though made under pressure, seemed sincere. As the containment team began to organize for the complex task of safely sedating and transporting an albino lion, Donna Clara finally allowed them to take her. She was gently transferred to the ambulance, her eyes still searching for the lion until the last moment. The animal, in turn, watched her departure, a figure of dignity and power, before turning to the team that now approached with tranquilizer darts. The battle for its freedom was just beginning. Outside, The scene was a pandemonium. Elias Vancini, handcuffed in the back of the police car, watched the spectacle of his own ruin. The strobe lights of the police vehicles painted the faces of reporters in intermittent flashes, while TV cameras broadcast live to millions of homes. The Vancini empire crumbles. Unacceptable cruelty. The albino lion, the unexpected hero. Headlines formed in real time, each word a nail in the coffin of his reputation. The dread in Elias's eyes turned into contained fury. He had planned everything perfectly, believed he was above any law, any morality. How could a wild animal, a mere lion, have undone years of building power and image? The humiliation was unbearable, more painful than any prison cell could be. He clenched his fists, wishing he could reverse time, silence the world, erase the image of his mother, victorious and protected by the beast he so despised. The forensic agents, indifferent to the external drama, continued their meticulous work inside the cold chamber. Every claw mark on the steel door, every piece of frozen meat, every trace of the fierce dog, still trembling in its corner, was a piece of the puzzle. The chamber, once a dark secret, was now a stage of evidence, revealing the story of unimaginable cruelty and miraculous intervention. The smell of blood and ice remained, a poignant reminder of the terror Donna Clara had endured and the calculating coldness of her own son. The night progressed, and the Vancini mansion, once a bastion of wealth and exclusivity, became a symbol of scandal and redemption. Elias Vancini, the man who believed he controlled everything, was now at the mercy of justice and public opinion, his world crumbling under the weight of his own cruelty. His mother, Donna Clara, the woman he tried to silence and freeze, was on her way to freedom, taken by paramedics, but with the promise that her protector, the albino lion, would be cared for. The battle had been won, but the war to restore order and well-being for all was just beginning, and the roar of justice echoed throughout the city. The ambulance siren ripped through the night, a sharp lament that mingled with the distant chorus of the press. Inside, Donna Clara, wrapped in thermal blankets, felt the warmth slowly return to her limbs, but the cold in her soul would take longer to dissipate. Her eyes, still tear-filled, fixed on the window, as if she could see the albino lion she was leaving behind. The promise of a sanctuary, of visits, was a thin thread of hope, the only thing preventing her from succumbing to despair again. He was her guardian, her miracle, and the idea of separating from him, even temporarily, tightened her heart. The paramedic monitored her vital signs, speaking in a low voice about hypothermia and dehydration, but the words barely reached Donna Clara. Her mind was with the lion, imagining the containment team approaching, the tranquilizer darts, the complexity of moving such a majestic creature. At the mansion, the scene was one of almost palpable tension. The albino lion, with its immaculate fur and golden eyes, remained at the threshold of the cold chamber, a living statue of power and vigilance. It observed the calculated movements of the containment team, its muscles tense beneath its skin, every fiber of its being on alert. Detective Almeida and the team leader exchanged nervous glances. Sedating an animal of that size was a high-risk operation requiring precision and calm. Any mistake could result in tragedy. The tranquilizer darts were ready, the containment nets positioned, but no one dared to take the first step without the certainty that the lion would not react violently. The air still carried the metallic smell of blood and the icy breath of the chamber, a constant reminder of the ferocity the lion had faced and overcome. Meanwhile, Elias Vancini, handcuffed in the back of the police car, was a pathetic figure amidst the chaos. Fury bubbled in his chest, an impotent rage that consumed him. He watched the strobe lights of the police vehicles dance across the eager faces of reporters, each flash a stab at his pride. The TV cameras, once his allies in building his untouchable image, were now instruments of his ruin. Magnate Vancini arrested! Unprecedented cruelty. The albino lion, unexpected hero. The headlines materialized in real time, echoing in his mind like an infernal chorus. How could this have happened? How could a mere animal, a lion, have dismantled years of planning, of power, of absolute control? The humiliation was a slow poison, more corrosive than any prison cell could be. He clenched his fists, wishing he could reverse time, silence the world, erase the image of his mother. Victorious and protected by the beast he so despised. Back at the mansion, the containment team, under the supervision of an experienced veterinarian, finally acted. With coordinated and precise movements, the tranquilizer darts were fired. The lion, surprised but not panicked, felt the impact. A low, guttural roar escaped its throat, a sound of protest, not aggression. It staggered, strength abandoning its powerful muscles, and slowly, with a dignity that impressed everyone, collapsed to the ground. The team acted quickly, covering it with a sturdy net and preparing it for transport. It was a delicate operation, requiring winches and a specially adapted cage, but the relief was palpable. The lion would be taken to a sanctuary, a place where its majesty would be respected and its ferocity channeled. In the ambulance, Donna Clara finally arrived at the hospital. The medical team awaited her, ready to begin urgent treatments. She was taken to an emergency room where the warmth and comfort of soft blankets began to soothe her body. But her eyes still carried the shadow of trauma, and her first question, even before any examination, was about the lion. The nurse gently assured her that he was being cared for, that the promise would be kept. The recovery would be long, both physically and emotionally, but the seed of hope had been planted. Meanwhile, Elias Vancini was taken to the police station. Every step was a torment, every gaze from the police officers and staff, a silent judgment. The registration process, the photos, the fingerprints, each step was a deconstruction of his identity, of his power. He, the man who dictated rules, was now just another number in a system he believed he was above. The smell of disinfectant and bureaucracy filled the air, a stark contrast to the luxury and aroma of power he had always known. The cold, impersonal cell that awaited him was a mirror of the chamber he had created for his mother, but this time it was he who was trapped, frozen in his own hell. The night progressed, and the Vancini mansion, once a symbol of wealth and exclusivity, became a monument to scandal and redemption. Elias Vancini, the king of his own ice castle, was now at the mercy of justice and public opinion, his world crumbling under the weight of his own cruelty. His mother, Donna Clara, the woman he tried to silence and freeze, was on her way to recovery, with the promise that her protector, the albino lion, would be cared for. The battle had been won, but the war to restore order and well-being for all was just beginning. And the roar of justice echoed throughout the city, a reminder that sometimes the most improbable heroes come with claws and fur as white as snow. The steel door of the cell closed with a dull thud, a sound that echoed not only through the police station corridors, but in Elias Vancini's very soul. It was not the comforting luxury of his mansion, nor the respectful silence of his offices. It was the pungent smell of cheap disinfectant, the cold metal of the bars, and the fluorescent light that buzzed incessantly, revealing every imperfection, every stain on the wall. Elias, the man who dictated the fate of empires, was now just a number, a file, a prisoner. The humiliation was a heavy cloak, more suffocating than any silk blanket. He slid onto the concrete bench, feeling the cold penetrate his expensive clothes, a cold that, ironically, was not so different from what he had inflicted on his mother. But this cold was different. It was the cold of powerlessness, of the total loss of control. Fury bubbled in his chest, an incandescent lava threatening to explode. How could an animal, a mere lion, have undone years of meticulous construction of power and image? The image of his mother, protected by the beast, was a torment that repeated in his mind, a personal horror film. He closed his eyes, and images flashed. His mother, fragile but defiant, protected by that impossible white mane. The dog, his loyal executioner, whimpering, defeated. The irony was a bitter bile in his throat. He had tried to freeze his mother's spirit, to silence her will, only to find himself trapped in a different kind of ice, a prison of his own making. The news, filtering through the thin walls, was a new torment, the hero lion. His name, Elias Vancini, now synonymous not with power, but with monstrous cruelty, a footnote in the legend of a white lion. Every headline, every whispered conversation of the guards was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. He clenched his fists, rage a familiar and comforting warmth, but even that seemed impotent there. What good was rage when he had no one left to command, nothing left to control? He was a dethroned king, stripped of his crown, left to rot in a kingdom of shadows. The silence of the night was punctuated by distant laments, the clang of metal, the restless murmurs of other lost souls. Sleep was a denied luxury, replaced by an endless cycle of his mistakes, each magnified, distorted, until his mind was a kaleidoscope of regret and impotent fury. He had wanted to erase his mother, but instead he had erased himself. In the hospital bed, Donna Clara felt the warmth slowly return to her body, but her soul still carried the scars of the cold chamber. The nurse, a figure of unwavering kindness, spoke of recovery, of imminent discharge, of a future where Elias's shadow would not reach her. But Clara's mind still wandered, not to the horror of the cold or the threat of the dog, but to the golden eyes of the albino lion. He had been her anchor, her improbable protector. The promise of his sanctuary was a balm, a soft melody that calmed the storm in her chest. She imagined him free, under the sun, his white fur gleaming against the lush green. It was an image of peace, a stark contrast to the darkness she had endured. The doctor confirmed her improvement, the resilience of her spirit. "You are a warrior, Donna Clara." Warrior. Yes, perhaps. But the war was not yet over. The pain of her own son's betrayal was a slow poison, more insidious than the cold of the chamber. She felt no hatred, not exactly. There was a deep sadness, a mourning for the loss of a son she thought she knew. But there was also an ironclad resolve. Elias needed to face the consequences of his actions, not just for her, but for the very idea of justice. She wanted the world to know, for the truth to be revealed, not for revenge, but so that no one else would suffer as she had. The lion had opened the door to her physical prison. Now she needed to open the door to her own healing and to the justice that he, in his wild and majestic way, had initiated. She closed her eyes, and the silent roar of hope echoed in her heart. Meanwhile, at the newly designated sanctuary, the albino lion began to awaken. The tranquilizer dart had done its job, but the transition from a state of high alert to an induced sleep, and now to a slow emergence, was a delicate process. Its golden eyes opened slowly, blinking against the soft light filtering through the trees. The smell of frozen meat and ice had vanished, replaced by the fresh aroma of damp earth, leaves, and the breeze that carried the scent of freedom. It was in a vast enclosure, surrounded by dense vegetation and a murmuring stream. There were no steel walls, no distant sound of sirens or camera flashes. The sanctuary team, trained to handle large felines, observed from a distance, ensuring it had space and time to acclimate. The lion rose with innate dignity, stretching its powerful muscles. It sniffed the air, explored the terrain with cautious but confident steps. It was a new beginning, a kingdom where its majesty would be celebrated, not feared or exploited. It lay down in the shade of an ancient tree, the sun filtering through the leaves and painting patterns of light on its immaculate fur. A long sigh escaped its throat, a sound that was part purr, part roar, a silent declaration of contentment. The cold chamber, the smell of meat, the dog's growl, all of it seemed like a distant nightmare, a faded memory. Here, it was simply itself, a magnificent predator, a free spirit, a lion. Outside, the world was abuzz. The story of Elias Vancini and the hero lion had become a global phenomenon. News channels displayed images of the lion in the sanctuary, side by side, with grim portraits of Elias at the police station. The narrative was clear: the darkness of human greed versus the light of animal courage. Elias's lawyers, once untouchable, now faced a tide of public outrage. The prosecution, galvanized by the media attention, prepared a robust case, with accusations that went far beyond kidnapping and mistreatment. Elias's fortune, his shady dealings, everything was being scrutinized under the relentless lens of justice. The roar of justice, once a metaphor, was now a deafening chorus, amplified by millions of voices. Society, eager for a tale of redemption and punishment, had found its stage, and at its center 3 destinies intertwined: the fallen magnate, the resilient mother, and the liberated lion, each on their own path, but all connected by the invisible thread of an icy night and an unexpected act of courage. The cell door for Elias might have been closed, but the door to truth had been broken down, and light, finally, began to flood the darkest corners.